Starward horizons. In the centuries since we first broke Earth's gravity, we learned a simple truth. The universe does not give up its secrets willingly. We built faster engines, smarter machines, stronger hulls. We pushed outward into the darkness until the night sky became a map of human lights. But the deeper we go, the more we find signs we cannot explain. Structures too old to measure, signals with no source, worlds that look arranged. Somewhere beyond the charted lanes, a pattern is emerging, one that suggests we are not the first to reach for the stars, and whatever came before us may not be gone. This is the starship Argo. This is Captain Raphael A. Sterling. The quest for the infinite begins here. Episode 4, The Null Chapel. The Argo carried its new knowledge the way a diver carries air, invisibly, constantly, and with an awareness that it could run out. After the choir of dust, the ship felt different, not because any single panel looked altered, but because the rules around the ship had changed. A thin band of slippery surface preference now lived along critical leading edges, and Tanaka had installed a prototype resonance canceller in the same breath she used to curse it. The canceller was, in Tanaka's words, a counter hum. In Cade's words, a muzzle. In Petrov's words, a seatbelt for the mind. Sterling didn't care what they called it, as long as it kept his crew from becoming part of somebody else's instrument. On the bridge, the lights were low. The starfield beyond the forward view was sharp and indifferent. Calder stood at science, posture too straight for someone who had slept well. He didn't look at Sterling when he spoke. "We're not the only thing changing, Captain." Sterling leaned slightly against the command rail. "Explain." Calder brought up the lattice plot, those faint points that were now impossible to unsee once you'd seen them. After the dust world, the network's background noise increased. Not louder, busier. Like we tripped a motion sensor. Cade's eyes flicked over the tactical overlay. So it noticed us. Tanaka didn't bother to hide her irritation. Of course it noticed us. The dust node tried to ride our shield like a ladder. Petrov's gaze stayed on a secondary monitor displaying crew biofeedback trends. She looked tired in the way. Only doctors and captains looked tired. Like sleep was a negotiation they kept losing. "The bigger question is whether it's simply aware of our existence," she said, "or whether it's now anticipating us." Sterling watched the lattice points blink. "Do we have a next step?" Calder hesitated, then tapped a control. A new point brightened, not because it emitted more, but because it didn't behave like the others. Where the previous nodes had pulsed or sung, or spiked with storm pattern intelligence, this one appeared on the spectral map as a void, a notch cut out of the cosmic background, a silence where there should have been noise. "It's not transmitting," Calder said quietly. "It's subtracting." Cade narrowed her eyes. "A jammer." Tanaka leaned forward, fascinated despite herself. Or a shield. A null field." Petrov frowned. "Or a blind spot." Sterling stared at the void point. A signal made of absence felt like the most deliberate thing they'd encountered yet. "What's the distance?" he asked. Calder swallowed. 2 jumps, maybe 3, if we want to avoid known debris streams, but... Captain, there's something else." Sterling didn't blink. "Go on." Calder brought up the Argo's own system logs. "Ever since we imprinted the hull preference mid-storm, our long-range passive sensors have been cleaner. We're seeing less random interference in certain bands. Like our ship is shedding noise. Like we're quieter." Cade's expression tightened. "You're saying the ship is becoming harder to detect?" Calder nodded. "In some ways, yes. Not invisible." Nothing is, but less grippy to certain fields. Tanaka's voice went soft, proud and worried at once. It's working exactly the way it was shown. Petrov's eyes didn't leave her biofeedback chart. And the crew. Calder hesitated. The crew are also quieter in the same bands. Not physically, not biologically, but our ship-wide pattern noise is changing. Cade's gaze snapped to Sterling. We're being tuned. Sterling didn't flinch. We're being adapted, there's a difference. Cade's tone was sharp. Only if you still get to choose the direction? Sterling let the tension hang for a heartbeat, then made a decision that felt like the only honest one. We go to the silence, he said, but we go like we've learned something. Tanaka. Resonance canceller at full readiness. Petrov. Exposure limits stay in place. Cade. Drones first, then people. Calder. Plot the safest course. Calder exhaled. Aye, Captain. Cade didn't relax, but she nodded. Tanaka's fingers were already moving. Petrov finally looked up at Sterling. Captain, she said quietly, if this is a null field, it may be the first place in this network that hides not by being loud, but by being invisible. If there's intent behind that, Sterling met her gaze, then we assume it's the most dangerous kind. Petrov nodded once, satisfied by the lack of bravado. The Argo turned its nose toward the void on the map, and the lattice, faint and patient, blinked around them like an eye that pretended it was asleep. Between jumps, Petrov made Sterling come to medbay. He hated medbay the way captains hated any place where they weren't in control. Petrov's medbay smelled faintly antiseptic and faintly human, which was its own kind of threat. Petrov didn't offer a chair. She never did when she wanted him to take something seriously. Captain, she said, holding a tablet, I need to talk about the entrainment pattern. Sterling kept his face neutral. I'm listening. Petrov tapped the screen, and a set of graphs rose. Heart rhythms, cortical waveforms, autonomic synchronization between team members during the dust encounter and the glass ocean chamber. You already told me we were synchronizing, Sterling said. Yes, Petrov replied. And you accepted it the way you accept turbulence, as a fact of the environment. But there's a difference between being pushed and being guided. She brought up another overlay. Micro adjustments in their behavior. The tiny changes in stride, breath, and decision timing during the resonator event. The structure didn't just increase arousal, Petrov said. It nudged your choices. It made certain options feel easier. Certain actions feel natural. Sterling's jaw tightened slightly. That's what patterns do. Petrov's gaze sharpened. That's what well-designed patterns do. Captain, these nodes are not just relics. They're interfaces. And we are the user. Sterling didn't argue. We built the canceller for that. Petrov nodded. Yes, and that's why you're here. She gestured toward a chair. This time, she wanted him to sit, because she was about to make the conversation personal. Sterling sat. Petrov leaned against a counter, arms folded. When you were in the corridor beneath the glass ocean, your emotional response was unusually stable, she said. Sterling's eyes narrowed. I was trying to be. Petrov nodded. Exactly. You were actively managing your own internal state, and the system responded to that. It shifted when you shifted. It adjusted when you refused to be pulled. Sterling held her gaze. What's your point, Doctor? Petrov's voice softened. My point is that you are unusually good at not being moved. That's part of why you command. But it also makes you a more interesting target. Sterling felt the words like a hand on his shoulder. You're saying it will focus on me. I'm saying it already did, Petrov replied. Your heart rate changes were the first to synchronize and the last to break. You were the anchor the pattern tried to hook. Sterling's voice was quiet. What do you want me to do? Petrov didn't hesitate. I want you to accept that your calm is not armor. It's a doorway. And I want you to commit, now, to letting your crew pull you away if you hesitate. Sterling's throat tightened. He didn't like admitting vulnerability. He liked it even less when it was true. You have that authority, he said. Petrov's eyes didn't soften. I want it from you as a promise, not as a policy. Sterling looked down at his hands, then back up. You have my promise. Petrov nodded once, satisfied. Good. She tapped her tablet again. One more thing. The resonance canceller, Tanaka's current build, works by generating phase-inverted harmonic noise. It can break synchronization, yes, but it can also mask us. It makes it harder for external patterns to lock on. Sterling leaned forward. That's good. Petrov's expression stayed serious. It's good until it isn't. If the lattice network relies on resonance to identify friend from stranger, and we arrive wearing a mask, we may be treated differently. Sterling nodded slowly. We might be treated as hostile. Or as irrelevant, Petrov replied. Or as prey. Sterling stood. Then we use it like we use shields, he said. Up when needed, down when we must speak. Petrov watched him for a moment. That's the most human decision you've made all week, she said. Sterling almost smiled. Don't spread that rumor. He left medbay with Petrov's warning in his head like a second heartbeat. 2 jumps later, the starfield changed. Not in color or density, but in texture. The Argo's sensors reported a subtle reduction in background radiation. The cosmic microwave whisper was quieter than it should have been. Charged particle flux dipped. Even the random noise that normally plagued long-range instruments seemed damped. Calder's voice was reverent and uneasy. We're entering the Null. On the main display, the target system emerged. A small, pale star and a gas giant with a bright ring system. Orbiting the gas giant was a moon, ice-white, scarred with canyons, haloed by aurora. And around that moon, like a veil, there was a region where space itself seemed smoother, less turbulent, less alive. A null bubble, Tanaka murmured, eyes shining. They're suppressing noise. That's sophisticated. Cade's gaze was hard. That's concealment. Sterling watched the moon rotate. Or sanctuary, he said. Cade didn't look at him. Sanctuaries don't hide. Petrov's voice cut in. They do, when what's outside is worse. Sterling glanced at her, then back to the display. Any sign of active defenses? Calder shook his head. No obvious weapons emissions. But the null field makes readings unreliable. It's like trying to measure a storm through a blanket. Tanaka's hands flew over her console. Captain, the null bubble is interacting with our new hull preference. Our signature is dropping even further. We're blending? Cade's eyes narrowed. Or we're being swallowed. Sterling made his decision. Hold in high orbit. Drones first. Passive only. Cade launched drones with the precision of someone loading a weapon. They slipped into the moon's thin exosphere and down toward the aurora-lit surface. Their feeds came back crisp in a way that felt unnatural. There was almost no static, no atmospheric interference. It was like the moon wanted to be seen clearly. Then the drones crossed a boundary line, an invisible threshold in the null field, and their feeds changed. Not degraded, not scrambled, just filtered. The stars behind the moon seemed dimmer through their cameras. The aurora took on a muted quality, as if someone had lowered the volume of reality. Calder's eyes widened. The null field isn't just in space, he said. It's anchored to the surface. Tanaka leaned forward. It's a structure, a field architecture. Cade's voice was sharp. And it's letting our drones in. Sterling watched as one drone skimmed over a canyon. The ice walls were smooth and sheer, and embedded in them, half buried, like bones in snow, were thin black spires. Not many, just enough to be deliberate. The drone's sensor suite flagged them as the same light-absorbing material they'd seen before. Matte black. Wrong. There, Sterling said quietly. Calder highlighted the canyon coordinates. Signal source is deeper. The null bubble converges there. Petrov's voice was flat. A chapel, she said, surprising herself with the word. Cade glanced at her. You religious, Doctor? Petrov didn't smile. No. But this feels like a place built to make you quiet. Sterling stared at the canyon. Then we go, he said. Cade's jaw tightened. Captain, Sterling raised a hand, stopping the argument before it could become one. Not reckless, he said. Cautious, tethered, limited exposure, and the canceller stays ready. Tanaka nodded quickly. I can sync the canceller to the null field. Try to prevent it from harmonizing with us. Petrov's eyes narrowed. Try is not comforting. Tanaka swallowed. It's the best I have. Sterling looked at Cade. Security. Cade stared at the canyon feed. No visible hostiles. No movement. No heat anomalies. But that's what we always say before the planet tries to sing us into a storm. Sterling nodded. Then we go with humility. Cade exhaled, annoyed at his poetry, but not at his caution. Fine, she said. Standard 4. They suited up. They boarded the shuttle, and the Argo hung in silent orbit above a moon that had turned the universe's noise down to a whisper. The descent into the canyon felt like entering a secret. The aurora above painted the ice walls in soft greens and pale violets. The shuttle's engines sounded too loud inside the null field, as if the moon judged their noise. Cade piloted with her usual competence, eyes scanning for anything that moved. Tanaka sat in the rear, monitoring the resonance canceller unit she'd strapped into the shuttle like an emergency heart. Petrov watched crew vitals. Sterling watched the canyon itself. The way the black spires emerged more clearly with each meter of descent. They weren't pillars like the dust world's ribs. They were thin, needle-like spines embedded into ice, angled slightly inward, pointing toward something beneath. The shuttle settled onto a flat ice shelf. The landing gear bit in and held. No dust, no storm, just silence. When the hatch opened, the cold hit them like a clean slap. Their suit heaters compensated instantly. The air was thin but breathable through filters. The soundscape was empty. No wind, no cracking ice, no distant rumble. Sterling stepped out and felt, immediately, the difference. On the glass ocean world, the environment had pressed on his mind like a hand. On the dust world, the harmonics had shaken his bones. Here, there was nothing pressing, and that absence was its own pressure. Cade's voice sounded too loud in the calm. I hate this. Tanaka whispered. It's beautiful, Petrov said quietly. It's anesthetic. Sterling looked down the canyon. The black spires were more numerous here, arranged in a subtle curve that led deeper. Between them, the ice surface was unnaturally smooth, as if melted and refrozen in careful control. They walked. The spires did not react. No pulses, no lights, no warning chords, just an invitation made of path design. After 200 meters, the canyon narrowed and opened into a chamber, an oval hollow carved into the ice. In the center of the hollow was a structure, a matte black arch rising from the ice like a doorway without a wall. Inside the arch, darkness held itself too perfectly. Cade scanned. No energy readings. Tanaka's eyes were wide. That's impossible. If it's maintaining a null field, it must be doing work. Petrov's voice was tight. Or, it's not maintaining it. The field could be a side effect of something else. Sterling stepped closer to the arch and stopped. A sensation brushed his mind. Not a pull, not a song, a hush, like someone placing a finger over his lips from inside his skull. Petrov's voice sharpened. "Captain, your cortical activity just dipped, like sedation." Sterling didn't move. "I feel it," he said quietly. Cade stepped up beside him. Her posture was rigid, angry at being made small. "What is it doing?" Tanaka watched her readouts. "It's suppressing noise. Not just external, internal. It's damping neural oscillations." Petrov's tone turned cold. "It's calming you chemically without chemicals." Sterling stared into the arch's perfect darkness. "A chapel," he murmured again, and this time the word felt less metaphorical. Cade snapped. "Captain, don't go in." Sterling turned his head slightly. "I'm not," he said. He raised his palm, open, as he had at the other nodes. "We are explorers from Earth," he said. "We received your silence. We are here to learn." Nothing moved. No seam opened. No pulse answered. For a long moment the arch remained a black shape in a white canyon. Then the air inside the arch shimmered, not with light, with absence, as if the darkness deepened, swallowing the faint aurora glow behind it. A boundary formed, and beyond it, the darkness became a corridor. Kate's hand hovered near her weapon. "We didn't ask to be invited," Tanaka whispered. "Yes, we did." Petrov's voice was urgent. "Captain, if it's damping neural activity, prolonged exposure could impair judgment. We need a timer." Sterling nodded. 10 minutes, he said. "Hard limit," Cade said. 5. Sterling looked at her. 10, he repeated. "We can't learn in 5. Cade's jaw tightened. "Then we learn and leave in 10. Sterling turned back to the arch. "Canceller ready," he said. Tanaka's gloved fingers tapped her unit. "Ready." Sterling stepped through. The corridor beyond was not like the other structures. There were no glowing embedded lines, no bioluminescent pulses. It was lit by a faint, diffuse gray, as if the darkness itself had a gentle sheen. The walls were smooth, matte black, and they absorbed the sound of their footsteps. Their suit comms were the only noise left. Sterling felt the hush deepen. His thoughts slowed slightly, not in a way that felt stupid, but in a way that felt peaceful. That frightened him. "Petrov," he said quietly. "Vitals." Petrov's voice was tense, heart rates dropping, neural activity suppressed. It's soothing you." Cade muttered, "I don't want to be soothed." Tanaka's voice was quiet, odd. "This is incredible. It's a field that reduces noise at every scale." They reached a chamber. It was circular, and the floor was not solid black. It was translucent, like dark glass, beneath which faint points of light drifted, not stars, something else. The lights moved slowly, gathering and dispersing, like schools of fish in deep water. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, simple, matte, and unmistakably designed for contact. Above it hovered a shape, a thin ring, like the one from the waiting signal node. But here it was darker, quieter, no glow, no pulse, just a presence. Cade scanned. No emissions. Tanaka's voice trembled. "It's all internal, like a library that doesn't want to be heard." Petrov's tone was sharp. "Captain, timer, 2 minutes." Sterling nodded, eyes on the floating ring. "We record only," he said. "No direct interface." Tanaka set up sensors quickly, hands moving with practiced urgency. As the sensors came online, the points of light beneath the floor began to gather. They formed lines, shapes, patterns, not the lattice map this time. Something that looked disturbingly like faces. Not human faces, not alien faces, just impressions. The suggestion of a mind captured in pattern, a moment of awareness translated into light. Petrov's breath caught. Those are echoes. Cade's voice was low. Of what? Tanaka stared at the drifting lights. Of someone. Sterling felt his own mind quiet further, as if the chamber wanted him still enough to listen. Then the floating ring moved. It rotated slowly, and the air inside it shimmered with a faint distortion. A pattern emerged. Not visual symbols, not readable text, but a sequence of changes in the null field. A question made of silence. Tanaka's sensors rendered it as a waveform. Petrov's tablet translated it into a simple behavioral prediction. It wasn't a voice. It was a request. Cade's posture stiffened. It wants something. Sterling's voice was quiet. What? Tanaka swallowed. It's asking for a token, a sample. Petrov cut in, alarm rising. No, Captain, no exchange. Cade nodded fiercely. Absolutely not. The chamber's hush deepened again, and the drifting lights beneath the floor gathered into a tighter cluster. The impression of a face, an echo, rose clearer, as if it leaned closer from beneath the glass. Sterling felt a sudden sharp awareness. The node wasn't luring them with danger. It wasn't singing them into a storm. It was offering them a quiet, terrible intimacy. A library doesn't give without taking. Tanaka's voice was strained, torn. It's not asking for our data. It's asking for an imprint, a peace of mind. Petrov's tone went hard. Captain, if you give it that, you may not get it back, or you may get it back changed. Cade's eyes were on Sterling. Don't. Sterling stared at the drifting echoes and felt, for the first time since the first node, not just curiosity, but grief. If these lights were minds, then this place was not a trap. It was a cemetery. Or a prison. The ring rotated again. The null field question repeated, gentler. An insistence, not aggression. Petrov's timer beeped softly. 5 minutes, she said. Tanaka whispered, Captain, it might have something we need. The silence itself is a technology. A hush field. We could protect ourselves from the lattice noticing us. Cade snapped. We don't pay with our minds. Tanaka's jaw clenched. Then how do we pay? Sterling held up a hand, stopping them both. He looked at Petrov. Doctor, he said quietly, what's the minimum safe imprint? Petrov's eyes widened. Captain. Answer, Sterling said, gentle but firm. Petrov swallowed. If we absolutely must, something non-essential, a sensory memory without functional value, something that won't impair decision-making. Cade's voice was furious. You're entertaining it. Sterling didn't look away from the ring. I'm negotiating, Tanaka whispered. Captain, don't give it something it can use to predict you. Sterling's mouth twitched faintly. Then I'll give it something that doesn't define me. Kosher peepee. He stepped toward the pedestal. Cade moved instantly, blocking him. No. Sterling met her eyes. Livia, Captain, she said, voice tight. You give it a piece of you, and we'll never know what it did with it. We'll never know if it copied you or tagged you or... Sterling's voice softened. I know. Cade's jaw trembled slightly. Then don't. Petrov's voice was low. Captain, you promised. Sterling blinked. He remembered Petrov's words in medbay. Your calm is a doorway. He looked at Cade, looked at Petrov, looked at Tanaka, whose eyes were wet with frustration and wonder. Then Sterling stepped back from the pedestal. Cade exhaled sharply, relief punching through anger. Sterling turned his gaze to Tanaka. Can we give it a constructed imprint? He asked. A false token. Tanaka hesitated, then nodded slowly. We can generate a synthetic pattern, random noise shaped to mimic a memory imprint. It won't be meaningful, but it might satisfy the exchange protocol. Cade's eyes narrowed. And if it can tell the difference? Tanaka's voice was honest. Then it won't accept. Sterling nodded. Do it. Tanaka worked fast, fingers flying over her portable rig. She shaped a complex waveform, structured enough to look like cognition, meaningless enough to be harmless. A counterfeit coin. She fed it into the pedestal via a tight, shielded emitter. The floating ring paused. The chamber's hush held. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the ring rotated again, and the null field question repeated. Sharper this time. Rejection. Tanaka's shoulders slumped. It knows, Cade muttered. Of course it knows. Petrov's voice rose. Captain time. 2 minutes. Sterling stared at the ring and felt a strange frustration. Not that they couldn't steal knowledge, but that the only way in was trust. He thought of Earth, of the mission's purpose, of all the people who would never leave their planet, of the weight of coming home with empty hands. He also thought of Petrov's promise. He didn't want to be the kind of captain who paid with crew minds, so he made a different choice. Sterling stepped forward again, slowly, hands open, to show he wasn't hiding a weapon or a trick. Cade started to block him again, but Sterling raised a hand. Livia, he said quietly, if I do this, you pull me out at the first sign of hesitation. That's an order. Cade's face tightened. Captain! Sterling held her gaze. Order! Cade's jaw clenched. Then she nodded once, furious and loyal. Sterling turned to Petrov. Doctor, he said, monitor me. If I change, you tell them to pull me. Petrov's voice was tight. I. Sterling stepped to the pedestal and placed his gloved hand just above its surface. He didn't touch. He didn't connect. He simply offered. A memory, he said quietly, as if speaking to a person. A true thing I can spare. He closed his eyes and chose, carefully, something small. Not the day he took command. Not the face of anyone he loved. Not fear. He chose something sensory, simple. The smell of rain on hot stone, an earth summer storm he'd once watched from a Academy dorm window before he knew what the stars would cost. He let the impression rise in him like a photograph. He offered it. The pedestal's surface shimmered. Sterling felt a gentle tug, not violent, not invasive, more like a hand taking a cup you'd offered willingly. The smell faded from his mind. Not erased entirely. He still knew what rain was, knew what stone was, but the specificity was gone. The memory's sharp edge had been blunted into generality. Sterling opened his eyes. The floating ring rotated, and the chamber responded. The points of light beneath the floor gathered into a new pattern, cleaner, brighter. They rose like a school of luminescent fish, forming a shape, a map. This time, not just lattice points, but paths, routes between nodes, with one cluster marked by a density that made Calder, watching remotely through the shuttle feed, swear softly on the bridge. That's a hub, Calder murmured, voice cracking through calm. That's a center. The ring shimmered, and the null field in the chamber shifted into a sequence of changes that Tanaka's sensors translated into an engineering readout. Not readable text, no symbols, but behavior. How to shape a field so that external resonance slid off. A hush field. A way to damp the lattice's ability to see you. Cade's voice was low. A cloak, Petrov whispered. A blindfold. Tanaka's eyes were wide, tears in the corners from sheer intensity. It's giving us silence as a tool. Sterling's mind felt oddly calm. Not because the null field soothed him, but because he had paid and survived. He looked at the map pattern, the hub, the branching routes. Then the chamber changed again. One of the drifting echoes beneath the floor rose closer, and for a moment the impression of a mind pressed against the glass. Sterling felt something like recognition, not of the echo, but of the shape of its loneliness. The hush deepened. Petrov's voice went urgent. "Captain, your neural activity is dropping faster. That memory exchange increased coupling. Pull back." Sterling blinked. He realized he was standing too still, that the chamber's peace was becoming a trap. He stepped back from the pedestal. Cade's hand clamped onto his arm immediately, grounding him with force. The chamber's hush loosened slightly, as if disappointed. Tanaka's recorder chirped. "Captured," she said, breathless. "All of it?" Petrov's timer beeped again. "Time," she snapped. "Now." They backed out of the chamber. The corridor swallowed their footsteps. The arch beyond waited. As Sterling crossed the threshold back into the ice canyon, the universe's noise returned like a wave. Wind whispered faintly. The aurora hummed in their suit sensors. The cold felt sharper. Sterling inhaled and realized something that startled him more than any storm. He couldn't remember the smell of that rain. Not as a lived moment, only as a concept. He didn't stop walking. He didn't tell anyone, not yet. They returned to the shuttle. They sealed the hatch. And as the shuttle lifted away, the black arch remained in the ice, like a wound that had learned to be quiet. On the Argo, Tanaka worked like a person possessed, which Petrov had learned to treat as a symptom and a strength. In the engineering lab, holographic projections of the Hushfield architecture spun in the air, layered shells of phase-canceling geometry, shaped to slide resonance away instead of absorbing it. "It's elegant," Tanaka whispered. "It's so kind." Cade stood behind her, arms folded. "It took something from the captain." Tanaka's hands paused. "It asked for payment." Cade's voice was flat. "Payment isn't kindness." Sterling stood to the side, watching the projections. He felt normal enough. He sounded normal enough. He hated that he couldn't prove to himself whether that meant he was fine or whether it meant something had learned how to leave him functional. Calder joined via holo. His eyes were bright with the dangerous kind of excitement. "The map," Calder said. "Captain, the hub is real. It's a cluster of lattice nodes in a region of space where our charts have nothing. It's out there." Sterling nodded. "And the hush field?" Tanaka looked up. "We can build a limited version," she said. "Not as strong as the node's null bubble, but enough to reduce our resonance signature. Enough to make it harder for nodes to lock onto us." Petrov, standing by the door, spoke quietly. "Or harder for us to be recognized by anything else." Tanaka's enthusiasm dimmed. "Yes." Cade's gaze stayed on Sterling. "Captain," she said, and her voice was careful. "What did it take?" Sterling met her eyes. He could lie. He could evade. He remembered Petrov's promise. He chose honesty. "A memory," he said. "A small one." Petrov's face tightened slightly. "Do you feel impaired?" Sterling considered. He felt no weakness, no confusion, no loss of function. Only an absence where a specific smell should have been. "No," Sterling said. "Not impaired." Cade's voice was grim. "Yet." Sterling didn't argue. "Yet." Silence settled over the lab. Not the node's hush, but a human silence full of unease. Calder broke it. "Captain, there's something else. While you were in the chamber, the Argo's long-range sensors recorded an echo in the lattice band. A faint response. Like someone or something noticed the exchange." Cade's eyes narrowed. "So we paid, and someone took note." Tanaka whispered. "Or the node reported." Petrov said, "Or the network logged us." Sterling stared at the spinning Hushfield architecture. "Then we use this wisely," he said. Cade's voice was immediate. "We don't turn it on and disappear. We don't make ourselves strangers to the universe," Tanaka countered. "We also don't walk into every node bare-skinned." Petrov's eyes were on Sterling. "Captain, this is where choices become identity." Sterling nodded slowly. "We'll treat the Hushfield like a scalpel," he said, "not a cloak. We'll use it to disengage when we must, and we'll lower it when we choose to speak." Cade's jaw tightened, but she accepted it. Tanaka's hands returned to her work. "I can build a prototype within 12 hours, she said. "Limited coverage around key comm and sensor nodes. We can test it in deep space first." Sterling nodded. "Do it." Calder's hollow face looked eager. "And the hub course?" Sterling looked toward the bridge in his mind, toward the blinking cluster on the lattice map, toward the idea of a center. "We don't rush," Sterling said. "We learned what happens when we become part of the circuit. We go step by step." Cade muttered, "Step by step is how you walk into a trap." Sterling's voice was quiet. "It's also how you walk out." He turned to leave the lab. As he reached the door, he paused, not because he hesitated, but because he felt something subtle ripple through the ship's background systems. A momentary dip in noise. A hush that didn't belong. Petrov's eyes lifted sharply. "Captain?" Sterling blinked. The sensation vanished. He kept walking. Later, alone in his quarters, Sterling tried to summon the memory again. He closed his eyes. He imagined rain. He imagined stone. He imagined heat and the sharpness of ozone after lightning. But it was all generic, like reading the word rain on a page instead of standing in it. He opened his eyes and stared at the dim reflection of his own face in the viewport glass. He told himself it was a fair price. A small price. A safe price. He also told himself that the fact he was justifying it so carefully was in itself a warning. His calm chimed. "Sterling," Calder's voice said, cautious. "Captain, sorry to bother you. Engineering just reported something odd." Sterling straightened. "What?" Calder hesitated. "The Hushfield prototype, without being activated, registered a brief patterned fluctuation. Like it was being pinged, very softly." Sterling's stomach tightened. "From where?" Calder's voice was quiet. "From the direction of the Null Chapel. The node." Sterling stared at the glass. "What did it say?" Calder exhaled. "It didn't say anything. It was a check, a presence, like someone looking to see if we were still there." Sterling closed his eyes for a heartbeat. "A library doesn't forget its borrowers." "Thank you," he said. "Keep monitoring." Calder hesitated, then spoke. "Captain, the exchange. Are you okay?" Sterling opened his eyes. "I'm functional," he said. Calder didn't accept that as an answer, but he didn't push. "Aye, Captain," he said softly, and cut the channel. Sterling sat in the quiet of his quarters and listened to the Argo's faint internal hum. He wondered briefly, sharply, how much silence a person could carry before they stopped being themselves. Then he stood, straightened his uniform, and went back to the bridge. Because if the universe was learning how to speak to him, he would learn how to answer on his own terms. Above the ice moon, the Argo's engines warmed. Tanaka's Hushfield took shape. Cade ran new security protocols. Petrov watched the crew for signs of invisible influence. And somewhere behind them, buried in ice under aurora light, the Null Chapel waited in perfect quiet, holding echoes beneath dark glass, recording every exchange, and making the universe a little less noisy, in a way that felt, to a human mind, dangerously like mercy. Thank you for listening. If you like this story, please subscribe for more.